Greetings. My name is Louise Dente, and I welcome you to yet another edition of Cultural Caravan. On this edition is a special, as we're joined by someone who is no stranger to our family. He is distinguished writer, journalist, author, and he was the editor of the newsletter for the Organization of African American Unity, which was formed by the late, great Malcolm X, also known as El Haj Malik Shabazz. Let's welcome Professor A.Peter Bailey to Cultural Caravan. Welcome, Professor Bailey.
Thank you very much. I always enjoy talking to your audience because I think they're some serious brothers and sisters.
Well, we certainly enjoy talking to you, and we're very excited about this new book entitled Brother Malcolm X's Strategic Pan-Africanism. Tell us about this work in terms of, you say that it's an important guide for people of African descent. Talk to us about this book.
Well, I decided to write this book because too often when people talk about Brother Malcolm in this day and age, they do not talk about what he was doing internationally. And he during the last year, 15 months of his life, he was very, very involved in an international agenda. He called our organization a human rights organization, not a civil rights organization. And he used that term because that's the international term. You got a UN charter on human rights. And one of the things that Brother Malcolm was planning on doing was to have our case, a violation of our human rights that was going on in this country during that time, and take it before the United Nations Charter on Human Rights, United Nations Commission on Human Rights. Now, and this was rather difficult because in order to do that, you have to be a member of the United Nations, and the United States at that time was not a member. So since they were not a member, he had to get someone else to take our case to the UN Commission on Human Rights. And so he spent the last 15 months of his life working diligently, trying to get some of the African countries with whom he had some connection to take our case to the UN Charter on Human Rights. And so that's what this book is going to, is to try to explain and show. I don't try to pretend that it's a definitive book on the subject, but what I really want to get out there is to show clearly what Brother Malcolm was doing on an international level. And I think that that's one of the reasons that made the United States government and the CIA and the FBI and those folks very, very nervous and very upset.
Now, you mentioned that there is something you wanted to share with the audience from the book before we begin our conversation. Feel free to do so.
Okay, well, I was the editor of the OAAU newsletter. It was my introduction to journalism. Brother Malcolm is the reason that I became a journalist. And Brother Malcolm spent a lot of time traveling during those last 15 months. And we, of course, in our newsletter, we were covering what he was doing. We had photographs, things that he wrote, things that other people wrote, about him. But by this time, I'm becoming like, so I wanted something written for him. I didn't want to just be using stuff that he was distributed out to everybody else. I wanted something that he was writing specifically for the OAAU newsletter. So I kind of I'm not going to say I bugged him, but I would bring it up every now and then, about what he's doing. And finally, on February the 20th, 1965, the day before he was assassinated, he gave me an article to be published in the next issue of the newsletter, which was going to be the 10th issue of our newsletter, which, by the way, was called The Blacklash. That's what we call our newsletter. And so he gave me an article to be published in that newsletter, and he gave it to me on February the 20th, the day before. And because of the time of it and what he says in it, I thought it might be good to take a little bit of time and read the article to the public so they will get an idea and see what Brother Malcolm was doing, was where he was compared to what so many times they try to paint him as, when people who write now, and they always try to make it sound as though you would think he was almost becoming a total different person than what he was before, and he was not. And this is why I wanted to do the newsletter. Because what he says in this article is that we as a people must begin to see ourselves, not accept what other people define us, but to see ourselves as what we are all about, as who we are and what we are. And he also wants to go to the average. So he says, white Americans once populated the impression he doesn't have a Chinaman's chance. This meant that China herself was dominated by white outsiders. The Chinese people who were living abroad had no real power behind them, and they were therefore disrespected, ridiculed, and abused wherever they were. But today, that expression is outdated, out of use. The Chinese people seem to have more of a chance now than Europeans and Americans who formerly ruled, oppressed, exploited, and ridiculed them. China has become independent and has made herself a power to be feared and respected. Although the Chinese still have not loved the whites who formerly oppressed them, Chinese people are now given respect wherever they are, because they have a strong and independent motherland behind them and their own individual strength and respect. Wherever they are comes from the collective strength and respect of their mother country. Black Americans who are tired of being the low man on the white Americans' totem pole can learn a lesson in this. Our own strength, dignity, and respect is inseparable from that of our brothers of our mother continent, Africa. As the nations of Africa become independent, and the image of Africa and the African people changes from negative to positive, they're an image of strength and respect. And then we'll take the images of the Black American, the Afro-American also changes from negative to positive to an image of strength, dignity, and respect. Now, we here in the West and our people who are yet on the African continent have a common origin, motherland. We have common problems, and we have a common destiny. The key to our success lies in our ability to establish personal contacts with each other, build bridges of communication, develop a common understanding of each other so we can work and operate and cooperate with each other in the areas of mutual benefit. Just as the image of the Chinese people all over the world benefited from the rise and strength of China, the image of Black people everywhere will automatically benefit from the rise of a strong and independent and respected Africa. I've never heard a better rationale for developing a serious relationship between people of African descent around the world, but especially between people of African descent in North America and our brothers and sisters on the continent of Africa. Brother Malcolm, and he spent the last 15 months of his life trying to bring this about, and that is what is reflected in the book. Brother Malcolm's Strategic Pan-Africanism, an important guide for people of African descent.
So you raised an excellent point in terms of where Brother Malcolm was trying to get us to that level. The fact that he developed these really strong relationships with some key members, key leaders at the time. Nnamdi Azikiwe from Nigeria, Jomo Kenyatta from Kenya, Nasir Gamal Abdul Gamal Egypt, Kwame Nkrumah from Ghana, Julius Nyerere from Tanzania, Milton Obote from Uganda, and then Sekou Toure from Guinea. So he had, and I know in our last broadcast, which you had people on fire with that one, you talked about how Malcolm had these audiences for hours with these people, that he was an honored guest, that he was looked at as if he was ambassador to America from America, that the reverence that he had, that African leaders had for him, was something that if it was developed without interference, it could have put us further than we are. But the bottom line is, right now where we're at, where we're actually learning from the blueprints, and you being a very gifted editor and writer and scribe of having all this stuff. So now we have the opportunity to read his words. And what in this book, you have lots of correspondence that Brother Malcolm had with various members of the people. You also have certain records that the FBI and CIA had on Malcolm. Talk to us about some of the things that people, the value of these conversations, what people read. Yes.
Brother Malcolm, during that time when he was traveling in Africa, he had audiences, which means meetings with those leaders that you mentioned. And those meetings range from 1.5 to 3 hours each. That was unheard of. He was treated almost as though he was either our president and our foreign minister or our secretary of state. He went to them. He explained to them what he was trying to do and everything. As a result, Brother Malcolm was invited to the 1964 Organization of African Unity meeting in Cairo. First time that a black person from this country had been officially invited. Now, he was not able to speak because he was not the president of a country. The people who spoke were the presidents of the various countries. But he was allowed to distribute a statement to everybody there, including the presidents and the press and everybody, in which he strongly presented his position on the absolute necessity of a strong relationship between people of African descent around the world, but especially between people of African descent in North America and people on the continent. He felt that if those two groups got together and began to work more closely together, that the others in South America, the Caribbean, and places in Asia, that they would follow. If those two, if the people on the continent and the people in North America formed a more cohesive union with each other. So and as a result of his meeting with them, and as a result of his attending the OAAU conference in Cairo in 1964, the Organization of African Unity did something they had never done before, and they have not done since. They issued a resolution protesting against racism and white supremacy in the United States of America. This was unheard of. A printed, they distributed resolution. And I am convinced that when J. Edgar Hoover and the big boys in the State Department saw those things, saw that response, they said, this dude's dangerous. This man is dangerous to what we are doing. Because when they were presenting themselves as a free world, leader of the free world, and everybody has rights and all that kind of. That's what they were presenting themselves to the world. And Brother Malcolm was making it very clear this was simply not the case, and he knew how to do it in a way that these African, as I said, this resolution was unbelievable. And as a result of that, I am convinced of that. Because, and they recognized, Sister, kind of early, that Brother Malcolm was going to be a little bit scary for them. Because in a book written by an author, a white Englishman, prior to in 1959, I mean, the book was written in 1990, but he's talking about something that happened before 1960. Because he said that J. Edgar Hoover, who was then the head of the FBI, had at a luncheon meeting with Senator Lyndon Johnson. Now, people, Senator Lyndon Johnson, it had to be before 1960 because Johnson became vice president in 1960. That he said to him, we wouldn't have any problem if we get those two guys fighting and we could get them to kill one another off. Those two guys were Brother Malcolm and Dr. King. So that tells you right away who they were nervous about. Eventually, in COINTELPRO, which was set up to spy mainly on the black organizations and black people in this country, in one section called where they listed their goals and objectives, again they say, we must prevent the rise of a black messiah. Malcolm X could have been one had he not been killed. And then it listed Martin Luther King and Kwame Ture as possibilities to succeed Brother Malcolm. And they were talking about how they must prevent. And what happened? Martin Luther King ended up assassinated, and Kwame Ture, who was then Stokely Michael, ended up exiled. So this was this is what was going on internationally, and that's why I say it's very important for those of us today to understand what Brother Malcolm and eventually Dr. King and what we're doing internationally, and that's what I try to do with this book. And as I said before, the FBI files in the book are the files. I didn't write nothing. I ran them exactly as they were printed. The Brother Malcolm's letters and things are exactly the way he wrote them. The OAAU newsletters, I was editor of the newsletter, and we were covering what he was doing in Africa. So the things that we did, all 9 issues, they put in exactly the way they were. And then the last section is the reaction of some of the press and politicians and people to what he was doing in Africa. And those were presented exactly the way they were done. So I think that I don't in any way try to claim that this is the definitive book on Brother Malcolm, but I think it provides a serious introduction and explanation as to what he was doing internationally and why he was doing it.
So, in alignment with that, I know that there's a Freedom of Information Act, which obviously at this point they were able to release. Are there any other files you think that are out there, or you think at this point they've released everything as relates to Malcolm X and, his experience?
I'll be very frank with you. I don't really believe that they ever released everything. But they did, beginning with they had to release, I think it was in the 1990s, when a law was passed and they had to release stuff that they had been kind of held back. And that's how, and I didn't know how to do it, but a brother that I knew, he knew how to do it. He got the file, and then he made copies of them for me. And that's how I got those FBI files. And when I looked at them, they were literally printing in those files the editorials. They were being written in the OAAU newsletter. They were printing the editorials. They were printing everything that Brother Malcolm was doing. Everywhere he went, they had somebody there, watching and sending letters and document. The State Department was sending back. I include some of the statements from the ambassadors in some of the African countries where they were upset and complaining about the kind of attention that Brother Malcolm was receiving as he moved around in Africa. They were very, when you see what this brother was doing and their reaction to what he was doing, it lets you know right away that what they try to tell us about his assassination is not the whole truth.
So, thinking about, for the audience out there who's listening to this and listening to what Brother Malcolm attempted to do in his lifetime, which was to forge this unity amongst our people and start the conversation, which unfortunately was interrupted. What would you say, how can we take this information and build upon what Brother Malcolm attempted to do as a community right now? As you know, recently, with the year of return a few years ago, certain African countries, starting with Ghana, welcomed Africans from the diaspora back home. There are others that have extended dual citizenship and so forth. And there are some people who have taken advantage of these opportunities. However, what do you think about that? That's one. And then how do you think we should handle this opportunity that's being given us to build on the continent? So
I think that we should follow some of the direction that Brother Malcolm, not only Brother Malcolm, Marcus Garvey, Brother Malcolm, Carlos Cooks. There were other people who were talking about Pan-Africanism. But sister, now here's where I get some people get upset with me. I truly believe that we should have a conference in this country, and the question should be: do you believe in Pan-Africanism? Are you a true believer in Pan-Africanism? If you are, please come to this conference. If you are not, stay home. This is not a lesson. This is not a conference to persuade people. This is not a conference to make people aware of Pan-Africanism. This is not a conference to introduce you. This is a conference for the true believers. Now, once we get the true believers together and we get organized, then we will have developed programs to reach out. And I really and truly believe that. And I think the way we could start doing it is instead of having like a big conference right away, have in major cities, have a conference like that in Washington, in New York, Chicago, Atlanta, have it in different places, and then have it. But the emphasis has got to be on the true believers. And now people say, "Oh, you're being exclusive, and you're being, you're being." I said, "No, I'm not. I don't care if you're a Pan-Africanist farmer, if you're a Pan-Africanist plumber, if you're a Pan-Africanist carpenter, if you're a Pan-Africanist academic professor, if you're a Pan-Africanist doctor, if you're a Pan-Africanist, nurse, whatever it is. But if you believe in Pan-Africanism, come to this conference." And I'm not saying that, in other words, I'm not saying, it's not some kind of exclusive. I'm saying that, oh, well, you can't put this Pan-Africanist farmer and this Pan-African, PhD in the same. No. All the thing is belief in Pan-Africanism. A true believer. And if you are, come to this conference. If you're not, please stay home.
Now, you raise that, and there are people sitting in the audience say, well, because now people are going to have to decide where they're at. Not everybody, as you said, were Black people. Not all Black people are Pan-Africanistic. Some of them say, look, if I get a chance, I'm going to build a big home and a vacation spot, or I'm going to build a spot, whatever. But they may not necessarily be of the consciousness. So are you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there needs to be people of like mind who are looking at building the connection with Africa based on the teachings of Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey, opposed to those who are simply looking for their own personal wealth and stuff? So you're saying there needs to be a distinction.
That is exactly what I'm saying for both people on the continent and people in North America. If you believe in the absolute necessity, as Brother Malcolm did, as Marcus Garvey did, as many other Pan-Africanists did, if you believe that it is absolutely critical for people of African descent to get together, because right now we're being the continent of Africa is being exploited by Europeans, North Americans, and Asians. Now let's be real. They're exploiting Africa. The Washington Post ran an 8-page supplement back in 2009, sister. You know what the title of it was? Africa on the Agenda. Not Africa's agenda. Africa on the agenda. And you know what the subtitle was? Africa, the key to global economic growth. Now, if you, the continent, are the key to global economic growth, why aren't we? We have to get together. And if you believe that, then you should come to the conference that we're talking about. If you are thinking about it, stay home. We'll reach out to you later. And because organizations are usually done, things are done by the true believers. The true believers get things organized. They then reach out to people who say, well, maybe I may do this. Fine. Then if all you will do is give it $10, fine. If all you would do is give us a drug, that's fine. But the people who truly believe in the Pan-Africanism, as expressed by Brother Malcolm, and later even by Dr. King, that type of, what did Dr. King say? We have been oppressed as a group, and we must overcome that oppression as a group. That's Dr. Martin Luther King speaking. So if you have that type of attitude about the necessity of us getting together and having some kind of unified thing, then come to this conference.
I think that your book actually comes at a very important time in our history. It actually makes us decide, do we, those of us who wish to do it, want to continue and build upon the footsteps, the blueprints that El-Hajj Malik Shabazz, also known as Malcolm X, laid out, and you've eloquently put all this information together? Or do we want to go upon ourselves having our own little villa, whatever it is? So it really challenges the Pan-Africanist to really do something that's build on Malcolm's work. So this book is available through where? How could someone get a copy of this book?
Well, they will have to contact me directly, or they can get it at Sankofa.
Okay.
Those are the only two places where the book can be purchased. Now, if you want to contact me, I have a phone number that I can give out.
Okay.
202 291 4560.
4560.
And you can leave a message there as to how I can recontact you. See, I'm not into all of this emailing and texting. I'm kind of not up on that.
But it's also available. This is self-published, I know, right? So this is also available at Sankofa Video and Bookstore at 2714 Georgia Avenue Northwest in Washington, D.C. And certainly we can give the information for that if you wish to have this book ordered, as well as going direct. But it's a very important work. It's a work that's really greatly appreciated by all of us because it's so important that we know how we can build, those who wish to pick up the mantle, how we can build on the footsteps of the great El-Hajj Malik Shabazz. Well, I want to sincerely thank you so much for taking the time to be with us, to share this very important information. And again, so thank you so much.
And I want to thank you for providing the opportunity to do this.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this broadcast, and we continue to encourage you to tune in, to write, and to tell a friend. But until next time, Louise Dente says thank you.